Hello and welcome to this edition of the podcast at Reyes Group. Today we have with us a very special guest. We have Nicky Perfect, who is the author of an incredible new book which is called Crisis. It's true stories of my life as a hostage negotiator. Nicky used to work at the Met and she was a hostage negotiator there. So Nicky's going to tell us a little bit more about how she got started doing the whole hostage negotiation job. And we'll also find out a little bit more about her background as well and see what else she's got planned and in store for the future as well. So Nicky, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
You're welcome. So first of all, tell me a little bit about, how you got started in the Met, I guess, and how did it progress? Or actually, what were you doing before the Met?
So I joined the Met at 18.
Oh, right.
So I was in my first year of A-levels. I was doing English and history, and school was a social event. It wasn't really an educational event. You're nodding your head, so I'm wondering if you can relate to that. But I used to go to school and do music and sport and chat to my friends. And
Right.
I think my dad kind of knew that I wasn't really going to go to university.
Mm-hmm.
And he was reading a paper one weekend, and he said he saw this advert for something called the Police Cadets, which at the time, so this was 1985. So at the time, the Police Cadets, the Metropolitan Police, used to run a year-long cadetship, and it was a little bit like being in the army. You could only join between the ages of 17 and 3/4 and 18 and a quarter. It was really specific. I know. And then you were there for a year, and they developed you and instilled discipline in you, just like the army. And then they sent you to training school. So my dad saw an advert for it. He said, "Hey, Nick, have a look at this." And I was like, "Oh, there's people having fun and abseiling and canoeing and mountain climbing. That looks great. And they're going to pay me. That looks amazing." And so we went along to the career centre at Scotland Yard at the time, and they showed me some videos of people having fun. And I was like, "This is amazing. I have to apply." So I applied and I got in, and yeah, it was the best year of my life, really. It was a hard year, but it was the best year and the best thing that I could have done. If I'm honest, my mum still says to me, "So pleased you joined the police," because I was never quite 100% sure which side of the law you were going to land on. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. So did you do all those things? Did you do the abseiling and the the surfing or whatever it was?
Yeah, we did all of those crazy things. Generally in freezing cold temperatures, not quite as fun as it was made out to be in the video, where the sun was always shining.
Right.
But it taught you a lot about yourself and about teamwork and about resilience and about leadership and understanding how to be led.
Mm-hmm.
At quite an 18 is an age where you're starting to find out more about yourself and what you want to do. You're exploring the world, having your own experiences. So for me personally, it was an amazing journey. And I met some really good people who I still see every year, and we're like, gosh, how many years down the line are we now? 30, 60 years down the line.
Wow.
And we still see each other every year. So you form really good relationships with people.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So you've done your year and a bit at the initiation. I don't know what to call it. The first
cadet school.
The cadet school. And so once that's finished, then what happens afterwards?
So you end up going to at the time at Hendon, there was this massive estate that had all the facilities you could possibly imagine. And we used to call it literally going to the big school. It was a half-mile walk across the playing field and to a tall set of buildings, and that's where the training school was. So I joined Yellow Intake in January 88 and started my initial training to be a police officer.
Mm.
Yeah.
And what was that like then, from doing all of this fun stuff to then doing proper kind of like training to be a police officer?
Yeah, I hated it.
Did you?
Yeah, I really hated it. I hated I'd been this might sound crazy, but I'd been very used to sleeping in a dormitory
Mm-hmm.
with other people, and I enjoyed that camaraderie and having friends all around. So I felt quite lonely.
Right.
And I had left school because I hated academia.
Mm-hmm.
And now I was having to learn law
Right.
and pass exams, which of course was fine because to be a police officer, of course, you need to know the law. But so
Yeah.
it was very different. Being in the cadets, we did a lot of community work. And so, yeah, so it was, I found it challenging and different. I didn't really enjoy it, but I did enough to get through.
Right. So you had this amazing fun time, and then all of a sudden things got serious.
Yeah.
And presumably you would have passed, obviously, right? You know, in order to graduate and
Yeah.
get through it. So did you ever kind of think, oh, have I made the right decision? Or, you know, it was really nice at the beginning and now it's not so great? Or what happened?
Not consciously. I just kind of got on with it, really.
Right.
I was like, well, this is the natural step.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens next and see where we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I felt that once I was in, that I would stay in. Because the idea of policing really appealed to me. The idea of not working in an office, something different every day, working with people, that kind of really appealed to me. So although it was tough and although it was hard, I didn't think I'm going to leave.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you've said, okay, I'm going to go for it. What was your first day like? If you can
Walking
remember
the streets, gosh, yeah. So I was posted to a place called Catford in South East London, my good old South East London accent,
Right.
Which was very different. I was born and bred in West London, so I moved down to the south, and that was very different. And it was, I can't actually remember my very first day of stepping out in uniform. I remember being super proud of wearing the uniform.
Yeah.
And determined to make a difference. And determined to do well, really, I think. And as I started policing, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to people, reporting crimes, arresting people, just having that interaction with the team. Yeah, I found you do 2 years of probation. So I did 2 years probation at Catford.
Right.
And then I moved to a place called Sydenham. And I found the 2 years tough. But again, I didn't think I'm going to leave. And I went to Sydenham, and once I arrived at Sydenham, everything changed because it was just a brilliant team, and I just fell in love with policing and what it meant. Yeah.
And did you forgive my ignorance with this kind of stuff, right? When you go out the first time, do you go out on your own, or do you go out as a bunch, or is it, you know, a partner or something that you've got going on? So how did it work?
So at the time that you would do your 2 years probation, and you had a period of time called street duties, which meant you went out with a experienced police officer for a number of weeks, and they kind of showed you the ropes before you were assigned to your team.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've gone out and you started to do the job, and like you said, you know, you enjoyed it. Tell me about how you got from there to then starting to train up to become this hostage negotiator. How did that work, and how long were you doing it before this opportunity, I guess, kind of came up?
Yeah, and I love the fact you said it's an opportunity.
No.
Because one of the biggest messages I think I have is that we're often taught that communication is a soft skill, and I believe it's a life-changing and a life-saving skill. And I believe if you're present in the conversations, there are many opportunities to be had. But often we're not present in the conversation, so we miss the opportunity. So, for example, that very first conversation I had with my dad, that changed my life forever. But that was just a conversation. And I think if you think about the conversations that changed your own life, and sat and went, actually, what actually happened there at that pivotal time? Oh, it was a conversation. It was a conversation, and I went, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Or, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And they're the opportunities. So, yeah, so it's interesting you use the word opportunity to become a negotiator, because that's exactly what it was. So I had 20 years in policing. I'd done a variety of things. I'd taken promotion, so I was now an inspector. So it goes constable, sergeant, inspector, so sort of middle management area. And at the time, I started to think about becoming a negotiator. I was an inspector on the firearms teams in London. So I was on the armed response vehicles. I was one of 7 women out of 650 men, and I had a team of 43 men. So it was a challenging time.
Yeah.
And soon, I'd been there for probably about a year and a half, and a female superintendent joined the unit, and she became our mentor. which was brilliant. And she said to me one day, "Have you ever thought about becoming a negotiator?"
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity in a conversation. My first response was, I thought you had to be a chief inspector, because in the Met you had to be a chief inspector for a long time to actually even be considered to be a negotiator.
Right.
And she said, no, it's now an inspector. And I was like, okay, great. So I found out a little bit more about it. I'd worked with negotiators before because I'd worked in some really busy parts of southeast London. I'd worked on the firearms team, so we were often working with negotiators. And the more I found out about it, the more my interest in it became. So I applied. It's a once a year application, so it comes out in the autumn, or did come out in the autumn. You have to do a written paper, an interview, and a role play. So I did all of those. I passed all of those, and I got on the course. And it was a 2-week intense course at Hendon. It was tough. I'd done a lot of courses, but this one was really tough. And if I'm honest with you, Robert, I thought I was quite a good communicator before I went on there. I was like, I'd been a cop for 20 years. I could build relationships with people quite well, even people that I'd arrested. I like to talk rather than have any sort of violent situation. And so I thought, this course will be all right. I'll be all right on this course, Not quite cocky, but fairly confident that it would be all right. So I went on the course, and for 2 weeks they held like a spotlight on me 24/7. Why did you say that? What made you do that? What were you thinking about? Who's that about? And it turned my view around communication on its head. And I suddenly realised that actually the majority of our communication is unconscious, and it's generally about what we want. And when you're talking to somebody in crisis, it has to be fully conscious and definitely not about what you want.
Right.
And it was really interesting. And I had one of those epiphany moments whilst I was on the course, and I was just like, this is amazing. I want to learn more about this. I want to be a negotiator for the rest of my career. I want to do something with it after I leave policing. I started studying psychology and communication and people, just became fascinated by the whole thing.
Right.
And at the time, there was a small little unit of 6 people who worked full-time. It was their job full-time. So the majority of negotiators in the UK do it on top of their day job. So at the time I was working, I'd moved from firearms, I went to Directorate of Professional Standards. And so I did my day job, and then I did negotiating in my free time. I'll say free time in inverted commas because it kind of wasn't much free time. So you do it on top of that. And I volunteered to do as much as possible. And 5 years later, in 2012, there was an opportunity to get onto the small elite group of people working full time.
Wow.
And I managed to get a place on that unit. And that was how I became a negotiator.
It's an incredible story. I honestly, I think it's so fascinating because you've gone through the full, I guess, almost the full gamut of all the different career paths within policing, from all the way from, a constable right the way through to being a negotiator, sergeant, I forget all
Inspector,
the other, inspector, all the other titles. But when you were, and you mentioned just now that when you were in the firearms team there, you would be working with other negotiators. Was that kind of when you thought, oh, that's cool? Did you see them in action? Was that kind of the thing that kind of pulled you in that direction a little bit?
Not, to be honest, not really, because they always worked together in their own little unit doing their own thing, and I worked within my own little unit doing my own thing. So we were both so if you imagine there's an incident in London, you have somebody called Silver, the incident commander, takes over that incident and they're responsible for it. And then they have tactics that are available to them. And so negotiation is a tactic, firearms is a tactic, public order is a tactic,
right? Dogs
are a tactic, helicopters a tactic. So you've got all of these resources available to you. So I would just be a tactic, really, for the incident commander. And so I didn't see the other side. So I didn't see what the negotiators were doing.
Right.
I'd hear what they were doing, but I'd be so busy in my own role that I wouldn't really pay very much attention to what was happening. So it was only when my mentor said about it and I started to find out a little bit more and I went with her to a negotiation when she was on call, and I was like, well, this is actually really different. They're talking to people in a different way.
Yeah.
So in policing, you're often telling people what to do.
Yeah.
You
Very
know,
kind of like authoritative.
Yeah, really authoritative. Quite a lot of the time. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're just having general conversations and finding out about people. And but some of the time you're telling people what to do. And I was listening to these negotiators, and I was thinking, there's something different about you. I don't know what it is, but there's something different. And the other thing about my mentor, she had the ability that when you left a conversation with her, you felt you were the most important person in the world. And that is a rare skill, and because those sort of people stick in your mind, don't they? They're like,
absolutely, yeah.
Wow, gosh, you just,
It's the Maya Angelou thing, isn't
yeah,
it?
it really is. Hugely, people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how they made you feel. And that is so true. So true. And I was like, I don't know what she's doing, but it's different.
Yeah.
And then obviously as I became a negotiator, I realised what she was actually doing was just listening to me.
Yeah.
And it's rare that we are given, I call it, give somebody a good listening to. And it's rare that happens.
Yeah.
It's really rare.
That is very, very true. It's one of the things that I think you're always kind of, when you're at school, the default position is already there, where I think the kind of the status of the teacher is above the pupil. So respect kind of goes one way and not the other. So what happens is that invariably you're just kind of like following orders, basically. You're never really kind of like having somebody hear what you're saying. So I think that's something that kind of gets ingrained into us. And then we try and unteach that when we put people in the workplace, because we want them to like, go and do things off of their own back. But they're kind of like waiting around almost for an instruction. And it's hard. It's hard to get people to kind of switch that mindset, really. I know that tends to happen a lot. I've worked in places like that where, people are like, so just start to don't know what to do, just chill. Yeah. But pretty soon, like your mind gets bored, and then afterwards, you want to try and do something. And I think that's the same with everybody. Just that little bit of respect to kind of go, okay, well, look, what do you think you could do? And that's the switch that sometimes needs to be flicked on for everybody else. Anyway, I've kind of gone down a little path there.
That's okay. That's no problem. But it's true. We're not taught about listening at school. We're taught to, we have show and tell. So we're taught to stand up in front of a class and explain what happened at the weekend.
Yeah.
Or you're right. Teachers will say, "Listen to me."
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. These are the orders to follow. Listen to me. And then if you do something differently, they often don't. They often don't ask what you're doing. They often do the accusatory. It's I know, because I have a 16-year-old in my life, and there's a few instances I can remember her coming home from school and saying, "Oh, so and so got really told off in class today." And I'd be like, "Oh, what happened?" Well, she was actually helping Jack because he wasn't feeling very well, and so she was getting him to the toilet to be sick. But the teacher just shouted at her, "Stop talking in class and be quiet," without there being a follow through. So it is interesting. I hadn't really thought about that until you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
But we're not taught how to listen.
Yeah. And just think that dynamic happens from like 4 or 5 all the way through until you're like about 16, 17, until you go to uni. And then afterwards, everybody's like, "Oh, why aren't you doing something for yourself?" Well, you've kind of almost completely had it wiped out of you in a way. So, yeah. So now you're doing or you started to do the negotiating. What was the first? Can you remember your first?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It sounds like you can.
Yeah, I can.
Can you talk about it?
Yeah,
or,
I can talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my first ever negotiation, I remember, because I'd put myself on call quite a lot in the beginning, because I got this new skill, and I was super excited to use it. I was going to change and save the world. I was going to be this amazing negotiator. And so I get a call one evening. I'm not on call. My phone rings. I pick it up and I see the name in the middle of my phone. And I'm like, right, now I'm excited, because it's 10:30 at night. This is unusual. No, who's phoning me? I know you. You taught me how to be a negotiator. So I answer the phone, and the voice, it's a male voice, he says to me, Nick, I know you're not on call, but can you go to this job? It's 10 minutes from where you live. I said, yeah, of course I can. So he says, right, this guy's been released from prison. He has gone round to see his ex-partner. They've got a child together. He's never seen the child before. It's the first time he's seen the child. They've had an emotional discussion. She's made an allegation of assault against him, and he has taken the child without her permission. There's been a car chase. He's refused to stop for police. They finally got the car stopped, and now they're surrounding the car, but he won't talk to them, and he's holding the child like a defence, like a shield. Can you go and speak to him and get the safe release of the child and get him out safely as well? I said, yeah, of course I can. I've got all these super new skills, Off we go. So I was waiting for a car to come and pick me up and take me to the call. And I remember this going through my head, and it was like, heroin negotiator arrives on the scene, which is me, of course. Speaks to the guy in the car. They have a really good conversation. He hands her the child. She shakes him by the hand. He gets out of the car, is led away peacefully by police officers. Of course, none of that happened. I was there for 8 hours, and he said 2 things to me. And the first one was, you don't understand. And he was right. I didn't understand. And the second one, I'm not going to repeat on your podcast. But this whole thing that I'd built up in my head was not true. And I walked away from it. In the end, he was tasered. The child was safe and sound, but he ended up being arrested, and, there was a fight, and he was tasered. And it wasn't what I had anticipated was going to happen. And I walked away from that negotiation thinking, what did I do wrong? How could this possibly have happened? I felt like a failure. And it took me a long time, lots more negotiations, lots of watching some amazing people do negotiations and learning more and talking to people. And I suddenly realised that whole conversation had just been about me, about what I had wanted. It was all about my belief system, that I was going to be this amazing negotiator. I'd got these great skills. Of course, I'd never even stopped to look at the world from his perspective. He's a young man, just been released from prison. First time he's ever seen his daughter. And something happened during that conversation with his ex-partner that has pressed all of his emotional buttons. So he's taken action based on emotion, I'm going to say, and done some things that perhaps in hindsight he wouldn't have done. And then he sees this like white middle-class, middle-aged woman walking across a southeast London road towards him. I'm guessing he didn't see a heroin negotiator. I'm guessing he just saw a white middle-class woman and thought, well, what the heck have we got in common? And he'd have been right. And I learned a huge lesson from that around looking at the world from other people's perspective. About one of my mentors once said to me, Nick, if you want to be a really good negotiator and be able to see the world from other people's points of views, then put one of your feet in your shoe and put the other foot in the other person's shoe and walk along together. And that was powerful because that really changed how I started to view the world. And I was like, actually, when you have that connection, because negotiation is just about human connection. It's about relationship building. It's about a conversation. It's about people. And I think if you have an idea in your own mind of how it's going to be, like I did at that first negotiation, then you're only ever going to see the world from one side and one perspective. And so, yeah, that taught me a big lesson going into lots of... I'd love to tell you that I get it right all the time now.
Yeah.
That would be a lie. Because I don't.
Yeah.
But what I am able to do now is become far more conscious of those conversations and far more reflective.
Right.
And go, okay, so what part did I play in that? I say it's a bit like communication is a bit like driving. You drive along. Most of us have been driving for quite a while now. You initially get in the car, don't you, and look at everything and go, how on earth am I going to do this? You bunny hop down the road, you stall at the junction, your parents are tearing their hair out, or your driving instructor is smoking his 50th cigarette as he's taking you out, as we did in the 80s.
Yeah.
And then you start driving yourself, and before you know it, you've driven from A to B so many times that you get to B and you go, well, how did I get here? Because it's completely unconscious.
Yep.
And then if something happens on that journey, like there's a thunderstorm or somebody runs out in front of you or there's a diversion, you suddenly have to switch in. So you become far more present and you sit upright and you start to be focused and aware. And that's the same as communication. We have all these conversations. Most of us in this room, if I said to you what happened this morning in a conversation, you'd probably go, I've got no idea. I just kind of had it.
Yeah.
But then if something happens, like maybe somebody challenges you or challenges your belief system, or you've got a difficult conversation coming up, then you tend to switch in a little bit more and become more conscious of it. So yeah, it's for me, I think what I've really learned from being a negotiator is conscious communication is key.
Yeah. And I guess when you're doing the conscious communication, I think maybe we even talked about it a little bit before when we were outside, was that it's hard to do because you're constantly concentrating on, you know, how it is you're kind of being perceived, etc., and all that kind of stuff. So it's hard. That must have probably like really knocked you back though for the first one that you did, because like you said, you know, you thought you had all these skills and you eager to road test it out, and then all of a sudden you go in your first one and then it doesn't work out. How did you get back on the saddle, basically?
Yeah, so after every negotiation, we always have a conversation about it, around the things that went well and the things that didn't go so well. And I knew I had so much to learn. I knew that 2-week course was just really the beginning. That if I wanted to improve, then I was going to have to really work hard to improve. And so yeah, so I just thought, well, I'm just going to keep going. And so I just kept volunteering for more negotiations.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that I worked with some incredible people, some people that had amazing experience, but also just had a real way about them. And I would watch them and observe them, and I'd go, how have you done that? How have you got them to start speaking to you after all this time? And when we talk about it, and they'd say, well, I could see from, I don't know, I could see from a flicker of an eye that what I had said had piqued their interest. Or rather than talking about me and what I was thinking, then I'd talk about them and what they could possibly be thinking. And so it was really interesting to just to watch and learn, and then obviously get back into it.
Yeah.
And do it again and again and again.
Yeah. I can imagine. I mean, like, if I was in your shoes, I'm just trying to put myself in there. Just to go back that next time, I would have been like, oh my gosh. It's like me jumping into the sea without, you know, the noodle or the ring, basically, and then just going underwater and then trying to come back up. I think that would have scared the crap out of me, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. So you're doing the negotiation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are you treating it like a regular job, like a day job where you kind of, I hate to say it, you almost want to go home and switch off kind of thing, or did you find that it started to, like, because I know I do this work in day out, right? So I know that there's very little difference between working at home and working and taking it home kind of thing. It kind of just merges together. Did you ever find that happen to you, or were you able to kind of compartmentalize and say, no, that's that and that's that?
Yeah. So, and that's a really interesting question, because I think a lot of people struggle, and I know people have asked me this before. How did you leave what you do at home, at work, when you go home? So honestly, I don't know that I did it consciously. I think I did it unconsciously. When I joined the full-time unit, it wasn't a job, it was a way of life. So there was an expectation that you would have your phone with you at any time. That was never spoken about, but it was like you had your phone with you the whole time. And if it rang, because you were on the unit, there was an expectation that you would drop everything and go and deal with it. Obviously, if you had a drink, then of course you wouldn't. But the majority of the time, and that's what you wanted to do, because you wanted to be involved. You know, you worked on this. If at the age of 18, somebody had said to me, you will end your career working full-time on the hostage and crisis negotiation unit out of New Scotland Yard, travelling around the world, teaching people communication, being involved in incidents, talking to people in life or death circumstances, I would have laughed and gone, I'm never going to do that. That's madness.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, it's your life. It is absolutely everything you live and breathe. I became the director of training in 2013. So I then became responsible for training hostage and crisis negotiation.
Wow.
So I knew then that I needed to know as much as possible. If I was going to be responsible for teaching people, I had to really know everything I possibly could.
So you were like at the pinnacle of that.
That was the pinnacle, and I loved it. Watching other people get the epiphany moment that I got on that course, and leaving after 2 weeks and thinking, gosh, I made a massive difference there. And then knowing that they would go out and they would phone you or email you afterwards and say, oh, I've just been to this job and I've done this and this worked. And, it was a real...
Yeah.
So you kind of lived in other negotiations vicariously as well.
Right.
So they call it a negotiation family, and it really was, because people could... I always feel that unless somebody has done something similar to, or had an experience similar to you, they sometimes can't... they don't get it. They might do their absolute best to get it, but they won't get it. It's like loss. If you lose somebody, generally the people that you can talk to most about it are other people that have lost some people.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you've not had the same experience, but you've had the same emotion.
Yeah.
Or something very similar. I was going off on a bit of sidetrack there, but yeah, it's
That's fine.
So often I would deal with something at work and get on the train to go home. And I think if you've experienced any sort of loss, you'll really appreciate this. I'd sit on the train, I'd look at everybody and I'd go, how are you having a normal day? How is this?
Yeah.
How is this normal?
Yeah.
How are you still carrying on?
Yeah. I can imagine it's probably quite surreal, because you've just, presumably been in a very highly tense situation, and you've walked out of it with some kind of output would have happened. But based off of that, then, like you said, it's almost like you're walking and everybody's just kind of acting around you. But you're kind of like, surely guys, don't you know what I've just been through like a few minutes ago? Yeah. That must be a weird feeling. Yeah.
So you end up building close relationships with people that you work with, because they get you and they get the experience, and they understand what you might be feeling.
Yeah.
And you also have the most bizarre relationships with other people in crisis, because you might only know them for 3-4 hours, maybe if it's a long time, maybe a few months.
Yeah.
And you have these most intense relationship with somebody because it's life or death.
Yeah.
And then the relationship's over and you walk away from it and you never see them again.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, a friend of mine read my book recently and said to me, how did you do that? How did you walk away? I don't honestly know the answer to it. I just know it just became a way of life, that it just becomes the norm. And so I was always very conscious that when I walked through my front door, and at the time I had a 6-year-old in my life, and my partner, that it wasn't going to be that part of the world, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
I describe it in the book as a darkness. So some of the things are quite dark, and I didn't want to share them with my family. I didn't want them to have that experience.
Yeah.
And it's difficult enough when the phone, if anybody that is in policing will get this, especially if they're in a specialist department where there's that expectation that when the phone rings, and it's probably the same actually running your own business, is when the phone rings, you know you're responsible.
Yeah, you've got to pick up the phone.
You've got to pick up the phone no matter what time of day or night it is.
Yeah.
And you have that responsibility. So even though that was there, you'd kind of sneak off and do it.
Yeah.
So you'd have the phone call upstairs and then come back downstairs as if everything was kind of normal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But in the back of your mind, you've heard something that, you know.
Or something's going on, or you might have to pack a bag and go somewhere. That's happened many times before. I've just had a call and been told to be somewhere at a specific time and pack a bag. And I'd be like to my other half, I've got to go. Okay, when will you be back? I don't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
So it's it was quite a when you look back on it, at the time it was my normal, but when you look back on it, it's like, oh gosh, how did we get through that?
It was
you
tricky
just do.
to handle.
You do, you just get on with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like I've mentioned to you before as well, doing the leadership kind of thing, and I suppose in most things anyway, is especially if you're doing something as as difficult as your job and your role, it's probably quite a lonely initiative anyway, because you just nobody really understands you apart from maybe the close team that you're around. So yeah, I get that completely with, you know, yes, you're among people that care for you, etc. But you are still lonely, even though you're not alone.
Yeah, and that you've described that beautifully, because I always say that the three most powerful lessons I learned from being a negotiator is that, one, we all have a story. So what other people see that's going on isn't what's going on. It's just what you choose to put out to the world.
Yeah, the perception.
Yeah, the perception. So we all have a story, and we all have our own challenges that we're all facing and dealing with. The second one is we'll all have a crisis in our life at some stage, whether that is loss of the keys, loss of a job, loss of a person that we love or care about. It'll probably involve some sort of loss, or the fear of a loss, including fear of change. You know, change is a big one that really impacts people.
Yeah.
And the other one is loneliness. I think loneliness in the UK is probably the biggest killer in the UK, if not the world. And it's not about living on your own necessarily. It's about being lonely sometimes when you're trying to deal with things that perhaps you feel other people won't appreciate or understand. So you're trying to internalize it and deal with it on your own, and that can be really hard. Really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like you said, you've got nobody else to speak to apart from just your subconscious, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Right.
And that doesn't always give you the answers you want to hear.
No.
I don't know about yours, but mine is never kind. It never says, "Hey, Nick, you're doing a great job today." It might say, "Nick, who do you think you are?"
Yeah,
but
yeah. No, absolutely. Even me having a conversation with you earlier on, I was just thinking to myself, there was no real reason to kind of, worry about the fact that I was speaking to you. But even now, I know so much more about you through the conversation that we've literally just had. And I feel a lot more comfortable talking to you, even though I know more about you, and my respect for you has gone up even more because you've done all of these amazing things. But I didn't know anything about you beforehand, apart from the book and so on. So yeah, it's very strange. Fear of the unknown
Massively
can
so.
sometimes make something feel so much bigger than it actually is.
Yeah.
So yeah. I get that now.
Yeah.
I just psychoanalyzed myself
That's it.
in the
Brilliant.
last half an hour.
Job done.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, and it's those, and it's the same with conversations. You know, those difficult. I always say the conversations you're avoiding are the ones you should be having, but they're hard, and we don't want to have them.
Yeah.
So we either talk about the other person behind their back and not do anything about it, or we avoid them,
just bottle it up,
or we erupt. So it's because it is hard. We don't get on with everybody.
Yeah.
And we're emotional beings, and emotions take over during
Absolutely,
conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me why somebody would read your book, and when you wrote it, did you have some idea in mind as to how people would take the book? As in, what were the kind of like the motivations, or I guess the things that you wanted to help people with within the book?
So I've had the privilege, and I honestly mean that, it's been a real privilege to perform the role that I did. And when I left policing, and I didn't know what I was going to do, I didn't know what my purpose was going to be. And I ended up randomly, this is another conversation that changed my life. I had my Skoda car in for a service. Don't judge me on my Skoda car.
I'm not judging.
in for a service. And I live in a little village, and it was at my village garage. And I popped in there, and I was talking to the lady that was the daughter of the owner. She said, "What are you going to do now you've left police and you've been a police officer for 31 years?
Yeah.
I said, "I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got a performance coaching qualification. I have been a negotiator. I've retrained as a personal trainer because I love fitness, but I don't know what I'm going to do with all of that." And she said, "Oh gosh, I was a personal trainer. I used to do it before Dad asked me to help him out in the business, and I've been here now for 10 years, and I never kind of went back to it. But he's kind of folding the business down, and I said, well, why don't we put a gym in the car showroom? And I was like, that would be amazing. Stick a gym in the car showroom, put a coffee shop on the side, because coffee and gym, traveling to London every day, it's perfect. That would be me sorted. All about me. And then she said this. She said, it's for sale. And I was like, is it? She said, yeah, it's been sale for a while. Dad's like winding down. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I went home and I said to my other half, oh, garage is for sale. Buy it. What? Buy it? What am I going to do with it? Change it into a coffee shop and a gym? And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. That would give me a new purpose in life. So that's what we did. So we bought it, converted the car showroom into a coffee shop and a gym. The gym is now a community hub. And we've kept the garage workshop side of it. And then I was an employer of 11 people. And I was like, wow, hang on a sec. And I found I was using the same skills as I was using as a negotiator. And I was like, this is interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I thought, well, if I'm doing it, then other people, I could share the skills with other people and it would help them.
Yeah. Yeah.
In no matter what situation they're in. So, and that's what I do. So that was one of the reasons for writing the book was because I thought, well, actually, these skills are so cross-border skills that you can use.
Yeah.
Not just in life or death situations, but just because people have crises all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And most people don't get a good listening to. And I found when you really listen to people and you can make a connection and they really appreciate it. The other thing is, then we had the pandemic, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So I had to close the gym. I had to close the garage because nobody was using their car. But the coffee shop, we were able to still keep open as takeaway. But it became a real community hub, a real community focus.
Yeah.
And we were taking food round to people. And I was finding that I was having conversations with people and I would be the only human being that they would see, even though from a distance or through a mask, I'd be the only human being that they would have seen for that whole week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was like, hang on a sec, I'm using the same skills here. Because these people are in a crisis and they're on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was amazing to be able to do that. And I'm really grateful that we had the opportunity to do that. And I had always wanted to write a book, and I'd kind of started when I left policing just to get things out on paper and go through bits and pieces. And I'd written like my version of the book. And I have had so many conversations with people that have changed my life. And I've also learnt a lesson from many of them because we all have a story. And in other people's stories, there are so many lessons to be learnt. And I thought, well, if I can get my story or part of my story out there and it makes a difference to somebody, then that would be a really great thing.
Yeah.
And so, so that's why I did it.
It's amazing. I mean, like, just to kind of see how that changed from just being something that you were doing as work to something that you felt, I guess, probably like a calling or something. I don't know what other way to best describe it. And helping people as well, because like you said, right, it's not just a case of you doing it just for financial gain or whatever else, right? We're all we all kind of play a little part in the world, some shape or form, and however we do that, we have an effect on other people no matter what. So yeah, I get it. When I saw the book, first of all, I was like, oh, I know a little bit, as in, I saw you do the presentation for Antoinette and so on. And it was in the back of my head, I was thinking, if I'm somebody and I try not to be in my shoes at that point. If it was somebody buying the book, I was thinking to myself, oh, I could use this for like job negotiation, kind of salary negotiation type things. Do you get that a lot, or do you find that people are using it for a specific reason to do with like their lives, or are they just reading it because there's a lot of stuff that goes in there?
Yeah, I think people are reading it out of interest
Mm-hmm.
because because everybody's lives are really interesting, and like when you sit down and you read about something you've never even thought about before, somebody else's life, and you read it and go, gosh, that's really interesting. I didn't know anything
Yeah.
like that happened in the world. Gosh,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. So I think people read it for that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the feedback I've got is around leadership,
Right.
is about reflection and negotiating with a variety of different people, because you're not always negotiating with just the person in front of you.
Mm.
You're negotiating with your bosses, you're negotiating with crowds of people, negotiating with your teams. And we negotiate all the time, with our kids, with our family, with team members,
Yeah. Yeah. We do.
all the time. And sometimes I think people see the word negotiation and go, oh gosh, what's that negotiation stuff like? And I've always been taught that it's just a conversation with a purpose, which
Right.
makes it a conscious conversation. And again, I come back to that being present with somebody is so powerful and makes such a difference.
Yeah.
And it's a skill that we all have, but we're not really taught how to use it.
Yeah. Conversation with a purpose. I'm going to try and remember that
Yeah,
actually.
conversation with a
It's
purpose.
not really a negotiation. Yeah. So with negotiations,
Mm.
from I guess a technical perspective, you've got one person who wants to do something and then somebody else who is trying to get them not to do it or to not go as far as they want to do it. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, negotiation is normally some sort of difference of opinion,
Right.
and trying to move that forward so that you end up collaborating.
Yeah.
So in my world, it was perhaps somebody wanted to end their life that day,
Mm-hmm.
and I was there to influence them not to do it on that day.
Right. That's first of all, that's incredible, but secondly, that's like that's really, I would imagine, very emotionally kind of like taxing, like we spoke about a little bit before.
Mm.
How do you kind of like recover from that after you've done something like that? Like you talk somebody out of killing themselves. I'd kind of go home and I would go, oh, I want a nice beer right now or something like that.
Yeah.
How did you do that? And don't forget, this is like probably on a, I don't want to say a day-to-day basis, or was it? I don't know.
Certainly a weekly basis
A weekly
of
basis.
some sort. Yeah.
How did you recover?
How did I recover? Yeah. So at one stage in my life, I drank and smoked way too much.
Right.
And then I decided that probably wasn't going to be very good.
Got it.
And for me personally, and lots of people do different things, I hit the gym. That's my biggest stress relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I get outside.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that I live on like a small holding, so I've got 4 dogs, 2 chickens. How many goats have I got now? Just had another 3, 8 goats. And I live in a beautiful place in the world.
Yeah.
And so that's my respite. That's my, your like safety place.
Your domain. Yeah.
Yeah, where I can go and put things to one side.
Yeah.
Even now as a business owner, as a leader, I think you need that space.
Yeah.
And it's about that mental resilience, and we were talking about it because today is World Mental Health Day.
That's right. Today
which
is Mental Health Day. Yeah.
Which is a brilliant day to have this conversation. And I think it's about recognizing that we all do have a crisis.
Yeah.
And I always call them the tip of the iceberg conversations. When people say, how are you? You always go, oh yeah, I'm okay, thanks.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you are okay.
No.
It just means that right here, right now, I don't want to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm not sure that you actually want to hear it.
Yeah.
But underneath that tip of the iceberg, there's so many other things going on.
Yeah.
And I think for many of us, and we talked about this before we came in, I've never been great at recognizing when I'm having a crisis of my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think experience has taught me that sometimes it's okay to just go, do you know what, today I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Even if that's just to one person. So, I have a great partner, so I'm able to do that. And in fact, this morning, because we've got so much going on at the moment in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, do you know what? I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm really overwhelmed today.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it exactly that's making you feel overwhelmed? And when you're able to then just have that conversation and put things in place, okay, so what can we do about that?
Yeah.
But if we don't have that conversation, that overwhelm becomes more and becomes more.
Mm.
So yeah.
And then it comes out as an event, some shape or form,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. It really does, yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. And you're very lucky to have a partner that
I am very lucky, yeah.
like that. When you speak to people now, and do you feel like subconsciously, like you were saying about the driving thing, that you're doing the negotiation in your head mentally, and it's just kind of like, it's like muscle. What's the word?
Muscle memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is muscle memory now, but a lot of it is being conscious enough to go switch in now.
Yeah.
Switch in.
And is it sometimes the case that you want to switch it off because sometimes you just want to, I don't know, you want to dance instead of box, if you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
You want to use the muscle for something else, a bit more freer.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel that way, or does it just come back to like the muscle memory because you've trained for it to be a specific way?
No, so I think the more you practice anything, the better you become at it, or the more conscious you become at it. And communication is the exact same thing. It's a skill, and you have to keep practicing consciously. But there are times when I do this, and I totally switch out from the conversation, or I just make the conversation all about me.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, somebody just listen to me now, please. Thank you very much.
Yep. No,
because we all just want to be heard.
Yeah.
You know, we all because being heard helps us to feel valued and validated, and we talked about that purpose. You know, what that purpose. If somebody listens to you, and you feel heard, and you feel that you have a voice in the world, you feel like you have a purpose.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling to have.
Yeah. It's what keeps us surviving, right?
That's what I believe. Yeah.
What would you give as an advice, or some advice to somebody interested in going down the same career path?
Yeah. So my advice would be, there will be lots of people that tell you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So ignore those people and find the people that will tell you that you can do it and that they'll help you to do it. So I have always had, at some stage, unconsciously probably, a mentor, and then consciously a mentor, and then consciously a coach. Because I have found that when you have the right people in your life, you can really do whatever you want to do.
That's very, very true. I mean, I say that to my team as well. All the time. I said, like, you have literally just one life, and you have the only thing that you really ever own is just your time. Just spend it wisely.
Yeah.
Choose who you're going to spend it with. You spend it with some idiots, fine, cool. But you're spending it and you don't know how much you spent with them.
Yeah.
It could go like that tomorrow, right? But if you spend it with people who will lift you up and make you better, then that's definitely worth spending time with.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Nicky, for coming today and for an amazing podcast session with us. We're extremely lucky to have you here.
Thank
you.
I'm
sure all of our viewers and our listeners would have actually learned a little bit more about how practical negotiation actually works. So if you haven't got it already, please make sure that you pick up a copy of Nicky's book. It's called Crisis. It's true stories about her life as a hostage negotiator, and it's available at all good bookstores.